Hello, welcome to today's video. My name's Lois and today I'm going to be doing a mini not so wintry book haul. So I don't buy anywhere near as many books as I used to, which I think is for the best. But I have some books that I've bought this year that I wanted to go through. They're largely quite small books, maybe apart from one. And yeah, some of them are from authors that I've enjoyed reading in the past and some of them are from authors that I've never read before, so I'm excited to share all about it with you today. So let's get right into it. First up we have The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. The poems of Wendell Berry invite us to stop, to think and to see the world around us. Here are consoling verses of hope and of healing, short simple meditations on love, death, friendship and belonging. Luminous hymns to the land and the seasons as they ebb and flow. Here is the peace of wild things. And here we have a nice little picture of Wendell Berry. Oh. Now, I read Wendell Berry for the first time, I think it was in 2023. I read a collection of his essays called The World Ending Fire, and I really enjoyed it. It was very different from anything I'd read before. I don't tend to read a lot of essays, and Wendell Berry also writes from some perspectives that I'm not too familiar with. So he writes quite a bit about farming, about the land, is quite opposed to bringing in lots of new technologies. And the other thing I like in talking about is community as well, and the past. I think something that I really like about Wendell Berry's work is that he is a Christian, but he is also talking about other topics from a Christian perspective. And I think it really beautifully demonstrates how Christianity can affect the world around us, how we treat the land, how we can look after things properly without commodifying them, how we can view things beyond money or progress. So I definitely recommend that collection of essays if that is something that you might be interested in. But this is actually a collection of poems by Wendell Berry. I don't read poetry very often, and I have been wanting to build up a little bit more poetry in my book collection. Some of the collections of poems in this book include The Broken Ground, Openings, Farming a Handbook, The Country of Marriage, Clearing, The Wheel, Given, and Sabbath poems. I also just find Wendell Berry so wholesome as a person. Even his name, I just love saying Wendell Berry. But he's just like now in his 80s, living in Kentucky, writing, looking after the land. Like, it just fills me with peace thinking about him. So the next book I have to show you is Revelations of Divine Love by Julian of Norwich. The 14th century mystic Julian of Norwich was seriously ill and preparing for death when she received a series of 16 visions of the Passion of Christ. After surviving her illness, she became an anchoress, dedicating the rest of her life to solitary prayer. She recorded the content of her mystical experiences, and these writings became known as the Revelations of Divine Love. A classic of Christian spirituality, Revelations of Divine Love vividly conveys the love of God and his presence in suffering. It includes the famous meditation on a hazelnut, which for Julian becomes an image of the love of God. And additionally, this is the earliest recorded writing we have in the English language by a woman. So I was actually visiting Norwich in the summer when I completely accidentally stumbled upon the Julian of Norwich church where she lived out as an anchoress, and it was very quiet. There was no one else in there, but they had a little shrine kind of area and leaflets about her, so it was really nice. I am also quite interested in the medieval period, so I think this will just be a really interesting read. I've not read very much Christian mystic writing before, so I'm very excited to read this. I have a feeling actually that we may have briefly looked at her in a module I did at university on Visions of God and Christian Theology. So I've definitely known of Julian of Norwich for some time, but I think it'll be nice to finally read more of her own words. So the first two books in this haul were pretty wholesome, quite Christian books, and now things get a little bit weird. So the next book I have here is The Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov. Now, I read The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov several years ago, and it's quite unforgettable. It's very bizarre. It's one of those books that's so weird, like you have no idea what's going to happen every time you turn a page. The idea was that Satan comes to Moscow in these different forms, including a giant black cat, and just causes absolute chaos. And then there are also, alongside that, there's these flashbacks to Pontius Pilate, and it's very interesting. I really recommend The Master and Margarita. So I wanted to read some other work of Bulgakov, and it's about dogs. I do love a dog. This dog looks a tiny bit like my dog. A rich, successful Moscow professor befriends a stray dog and attempts a scientific first by transplanting it into the testicles and pituitary gland of a recently deceased man. A distinctly worrying human animal is now on the loose, and the professor's hitherto respectable life becomes a nightmare. An absurd and superbly comic story, this classic novel can also be read as a fierce parable of the Russian Revolution. Like, that just sounds like a crazy story. It also sounds like it has some interesting themes, I guess medical ethics and animal-human hybridity. I think my brother has actually read this already. Quite often I will have a book that I want to read, but it's taking me a while to get through another book, so my brother will just read it because he flies through books so quickly. Okay, next we have another poetry book. This is I Am the Size of Whatever I See by Fernando Pessoa. So I got this book when I went to Lisbon with my nana in November, and this is actually from what claims to be the oldest operating bookshop in the world, which I have a little stamp from right there. Really, I just wanted to get a book from that bookshop and get the stamp. But this is a nice looking book. I quite enjoy the art style, and here we have kind of a depiction of the mosaics that are in the streets of Lisbon, which is supposed to look like the sea. This is an abbreviated selection of some of Fernando Pessoa's most notable poems. It consists of writings by Pessoa himself and three of his most prominent heteronyms: Alberto Caeiro, Ricardo Reis, and Álvaro de Campos. So yes, he's one of the most famous Portuguese authors. I didn't know too much about him other than a few brief comments by a tour guide. Now I'm thinking he may have been possessed from doing a bit of research on him. Yes, so he writes under different names. He writes under his own name, but also under several of these heteronyms. He definitely sounds like a strange guy. But either way, that's another book added to my poetry collection. And then lastly, we have The Sunrise on the Reaping, which is a lot bigger than all of those very small books over there. This is the only book in the book haul that I've actually read now. I really enjoyed it. There were some things that I didn't quite like and some things that I did really like. One thing you can find with prequels sometimes is that when they go back and tell the story of a character, so this story is based on Haymitch, who is a character in the original trilogy of the Hunger Games, and it's talking about his experience in the Hunger Games about 24 years before they are set, and sometimes it felt like his character was changed a little bit too much. I personally felt like they changed his character to be a little bit too much like Katniss. He's also kind of involved in all these rebel plots throughout the story, trying to make a poster against the Capitol. Whereas this isn't the impression you get as much in the original trilogy. you get the impression that he's just trying to survive, whereas this is not really how it goes in this novel. But either way, I really enjoyed reading about the 50th Hunger Games, or the second Quarter Quell, which was the story told here. I liked reading about the other tributes, the arena, and it was really good, and there's a film coming out next year that I'm very excited to see. It's quite nostalgic for me going back into the Hunger Games world, as it was something that was very big in my teenage years. So these are all the books that I got this year in my little book haul. Let me know which of these you would most want to read. I would love to hear in the comment section. And until next time, bye!